So in case you didn't know it, where we live matters. It matters in positive ways, and it also matters in not so positive ways. This community has known that for a while, but in 2010 we were jarred yet again and reminded that where we live matters. We were jarred by information that talked about not how we in certain areas of our city fare against others, but how certain parts of our community fare in relation to other parts of our community. The information was generated out of work at McMaster University. It was branded in a way that, unfortunately, more recently has become a bit of a negative brand. You can read the branding in the brochure you have today. So I talk about the research because that's what's really important. And caught up in that 2010 swell of information and what can we do to level the playing fields across neighborhoods and across populations in our community, I ended up being swept out of a job that I loved in a nonprofit organization and landed at City Hall. And I'm a basketball referee, not that bright. Just ask any coach. One coach said to me one day, "You know, Paul, why players can only stand 3 seconds in the key? It's because that's only how high you can count." So I'm sitting at City Hall, caught up in this sense of what are we going to do about neighborhoods in our community? How will the city play its position? And scared to death about exactly what we would do. But there is good news in our community because we have some things that have been going on in Hamilton for quite some time that gave me a bit of background. Our community foundation has been deeply committed to understanding how people can work together at the local level and create change. We have nonprofit organizations, community groups that are not registered that have been working for years and doing incredible things. So we had lots to draw on. And I had known about the work of John McKnight and about asset-based community development for years. And as I thought about what we might try and do and push as an idea for how to change some of those statistics over time in our community about how neighborhoods were faring in comparison to other neighborhoods, I said, what better place to start than asset-based community development? And in Hamilton, we did just that. In Hamilton, we decided that instead of trying to figure out ways in boardrooms and in closed sessions with a few people about how to change the way this community was moving forward, we'd actually go out and ask a pretty simple question. How would you, groups of residents within areas of our community, how would you set forward a plan to make this a healthier place to live, work, play, learn? How would institutions then play their role to help not tell communities what needed to be done, but support communities in the direction they were already wanting to move? And secondly, how instead of constantly putting up that list of needs, would we start instead by putting up a list of our assets? We should never bury our heads in the sand about the troubles and the issues and the challenges that face our community. But starting from an asset-based approach is a very different way of coming at issues. Adding up the collective abilities that are in the room, of the individuals, of institutions, of the places of our community, and saying that is the place we're going to start to change our city or our neighborhood or our country. That's the way to do business. And so we did just that. In neighborhoods, we sat down with residents. We met physically in assets in their neighborhoods. This is the Two Cougars Cafe on Burlington Street. Anybody ever been there? Fantastic neighborhood joint. They opened up in the evening for our meeting and put on a great spread. We met in the neighborhood. We met and celebrated an asset in the neighborhood and started to talk about what we might do next. In the Stinson neighborhood, just a little bit east of where we are today, proud of their history and their heritage, we met in a wonderful heritage home. Completely ridiculous from a meeting perspective, but wonderful from a neighborhood asset perspective. We had notes being taken with people with their knee up and the computer jammed up against the wall, and we had people in corners and nooks and crannies, but it was a chance for us to celebrate what was about that neighborhood and start the conversation in a place that represented the assets that were there. We met in parks, and we started to plan, again, not in closed sessions or in public information centers, those wonderful bureaucratic ways. We started to plan where people were. And residents were involved and in charge of setting priorities and talking with their neighbors and with their fellow residents and businesses and neighborhood associations and neighborhood groups about what they wanted. And we did business propped up against fences. We did business with things tacked on trees, not in a way that would damage the tree long term, but in ways that would allow us to use the physical and natural elements of the neighborhood and have conversations where, quite frankly, better creativity happens. If we're going to talk about park redevelopment, why don't we go into the park? I've never met a boardroom that can replicate what a park looks like. We came up with plans, and the structure and the style of them is not important. What is important is the fact that residents committed to being part not only of the planning of the actions that were taking place in neighborhoods, but they wanted to be part of the implementation. And in every action that's going on in neighborhoods across this community, the residents themselves are saying, yes, we're committed to this. Yes, we have collective ownership of where this community is going. And when it came to getting political buy-in for this, we said, these aren't our plans. It's not Paul Johnson's plan. It's not the city of Hamilton's plans. It's your plans. So they celebrated at City Hall. They met with our mayor, resident leaders, and said, here's the plans we have. They came with their friends and their neighbors and their family members, and they packed City Hall. They had to remove the glass barriers in City Hall so that people could sit in the foyer and listen to their colleagues talk about their plan. Only once in our history as an amalgamated city have we had a larger gathering at City Hall for business of City Hall. And it was when water meters were going in. Because they didn't want the city coming into their houses, right, and putting in water meters. So we were there in numbers saying, this is the community that we want to be a part of, and we are the community that we want to make. But what's wonderful about neighborhood work that's happening here in Hamilton today is when you see the assets in action. We saw the assets in action in terms of talking about where we were as a community and the plans that residents had in their minds about where they wanted to take their neighborhoods, and the implementation of those plans, which is where we'll be judged as a city, is what's really exciting right now. So let's talk a little bit about those assets in action. And we're going to try and make sure that technically we make this work for the rest of the time as well. So let's talk about little Oliver. The time this picture was taken, Oliver was 8 years old. Oliver was gardening with his sister and his parents and selling the vegetables that he was growing to his neighbors and raising money for children's charities in this community. Oliver decided it would be a good idea to get a grant so that he could teach more people to grow their own vegetables in their backyard and hopefully help out more kids in his community. Now, let me tell you, I was a fundraiser at our CFMU radio station back when I was sports director, and with, at that time, 2 years of university education under my belt and a radio station behind me, I raised a whopping $2,500 for our sports program. Oliver got 10 times that, and he hadn't even reached his 10th birthday. To suggest we don't have assets at all ages and all abilities in our community is false. We do. And Oliver's a tremendous example. He led an education session in Gage Park, teaching people how to grow vegetables in their gardens. I got a phone call one day at City Hall from our IT department. I figured I had installed something I shouldn't have on my computer and that they were going to reprimand me. But instead they said, Paul, we've heard you talk about assets and what we can bring to the table, and we want to help out this neighborhood work that's emerging. I said, great, what's your idea? And they said, well, we as the City of Hamilton are hosting the Municipal Information Services Association Conference. And I said, you'll have to excuse me, I don't know what that is. They said it's a bunch of us geeks in IT that get together every once in a while and talk about things that municipalities should think about with technology, which is wonderful. But the vendors that come to that event, we'd like to tap on the shoulder and say, how are you helping out our neighborhoods when you visit this city? Those vendors that they tapped on the shoulders did two things. They raised enough resources to make sure that every planning group that we're working with in our initial phase of neighborhood action in this city had computers, laptops, so that the notes and the ideas could be captured well by everyone who was working on them at the neighborhood level. And the second thing they did is they wanted to connect people physically to their neighborhoods. And so they purchased bikes for families. Not just bikes for kids, but bikes for families. Helmets and locks. And we went off and had a great day celebrating families working together and having a chance to explore their neighborhoods together, getting the bikes and making sure that we could get them back to the homes. So our HSR folks came along and said, we've got ways to keep all those bikes in touch, and we made sure it all got back to their residences okay. People coming forward and saying, what is it that I can do? In parks, we've been bringing out people to start to do work in their parks, a fairly traditional activity, but I can tell you that these folks that are working on their park are going one step further. They're in the midst of a 3-year project to completely transform not only their park area, but also the community center that's across the street to create a large-scale civic square. They want it to be the bump-in space in their community. You know that place where you bump into the people in your neighborhood? How do we create more of those spaces so that we can reduce crime, so we can increase social cohesion, so that we can increase the kinds of activities that make for strong, healthy neighborhoods? It's about involving everyone in that work. And then we had an interesting call. Groups of funders that had got together and said, we'd like to support somehow this neighborhood work, had been reading the plans that residents had been creating, and said, we'd like to do 2 things. We'd like to train people to get back to work, and we'd like to beautify neighborhoods. And it led to the Neighborhood Home Improvement Program. Take unemployed individuals from neighborhoods and give them training in the basics of construction. The construction projects that offered the training opportunities were exterior renovations to homes in the community. This is the picture of Anna's backyard. The city, in its oh so nice way, had come along and said, that structure is unsafe, it's got to come down. We were going to tell her to tear down the shed that housed all the things that she liked and needed for her gardening. And at the same time, her fence wasn't looking too great either. And in fact, the fence had become a bit of a problem because when her grandkids visited, they weren't able to go out in the backyard and play in the community because she was afraid they'd sneak out. She was afraid other things from the neighborhood might sneak in. And she was worried about that. So the program came along. She dubbed these individuals, all out of work and looking for opportunities to train and get back into the workforce. She called them her hard hat angels. And they ripped everything down. And they built stuff up. And if you want to see the transformation, here's the shed, now fully functional. The fence, brand new. But what's really exciting is that crew came back after hours and did something a little special. You see the garden on the right side of the screen? What letter is that upside down? A for Anna. They built Anna a little bit of a garden with her first name. The crew chief on this came back the next day and said, when did this get done? And they said, we came back after. You know why? Because this is our neighborhood. And we're here not just getting training and doing the 9-to-5 thing. We're here to make this a better neighborhood. One of the great things that's going on in our community is people are trying to find ways of connecting with each other. We now have 4 neighborhood broadsheets that are being handed out to up to 50,000 residents and businesses in the community. This one is from the Sherman neighborhood, I believe. You've probably seen, I think I saw a copy floating around here of The Point from Crown Point. The Stinzine from Stinson community is just about to launch. And in our Gibson and Lansdale neighborhoods, there's the Herald. These are ways and sustainable ways for people to remain connected. Almost all have asked for little bits of seed money to start up. None have asked for any money after that. The community itself is finding ways to sustain these things because these are the way residents in neighborhoods communicate good information. So we are transforming spaces that were once dark places where people would hang out and do nasty things into gardens. There is a transformation in the community to take back public space and make it as something that comes alive. And these are some of the folks that are doing it. This is the leadership of just a few of the community organizations in Hamilton. that are taking ownership of their neighborhood and asking everyone in this city to join with them. At one of those council presentations, there was a great moment where an individual from one of the neighborhoods looked all of our councilors and the mayor in the eye and said, "This is our neighborhood plan and we're going to implement it. We'd love it if you helped out because it'll make it go a little faster. We'll perhaps achieve things in a little bit of a bigger way, but make no mistake, this is our plan and we're going to implement it." That is that wonderful moment of ownership. And a little more than a month ago, we invited a whole bunch of partners together to celebrate, not celebrate mission accomplished, because we haven't quite got there yet, but to celebrate in the first 3 years of working together some of the things that we've accomplished. These were institutions, education, healthcare, residents from the neighborhood level, nonprofit organizations in the room saying we are committed to neighborhood action. And what's coming out of it are the kinds of next big steps that make us, I think, excited about the future. Because it's through these conversations about what residents are really saying are the paths forward for their communities that things like the movement of a children's health facility from a suburban location that was difficult to access to a downtown location that is easy to access, and more importantly, an engagement model that's going to see that facility have a community use as well as the clinical use. It's where those conversations start to see large-scale transformation. It's where policies will get discussed to allow us to take the next step, beyond projects at the neighborhood level, to see long-lasting change. I hope someday this is the sign that we see coming into our community. Because the ones now all have a different population number on them, so I'm not sure they're overly useful anyways. But this is the kind of thing we want to see. I'm not here today to say that we have found a way to transform the statistics that we saw in 2010, turn them around on their head, and that next year you'll see a report that says we've made it all the way. But I believe that we're on the path to doing things the right way. It is about what we can collectively bring as our assets to issues and challenges that confront our community. And if we do it that way, we'll be successful. Thank you.